screenplay was written by Lucas Paraíso, as a friend of ours, and this is the first time I make a movie that's not my writing, you know, it's not so personal. So it's very personal to him, but he's a very close friend of ours. In fact, Clara introduced us to a while ago. And so it's a bit of interpreting a personal story of his. It's a different process, a new process to us. And I believe that he first wrote for the family. He was interested in that family, and he was very inspired by Lucrezia Martel at this time. Very inspired by La Ciénaga. He wrote the screenplay around 2004 or 5. So very soon after Lula was elected. And I think he first rewrites, he was working he was doing this in Cuba at the time. He was a student in the Santo Antonio de los Baños school in Cuba. And his teacher advised him to think of the context, and then he brought Lula in, you know. So I'm pretty sure the order was that. First came the family, then came the context. And this shock is what really interests me, actually, with no order of priority, with not one being more important than the other, both being equally there. I think if it was just the family, it wouldn't be nearly as interesting to me, and to Clara as well. And I think that the meaning of this film has changed so much through the years since 2005, because, I mean, who could imagine the political situation that we would be living today at this time, you know? He wanted to talk about the fears and prejudices of this bourgeoisie who was very afraid that they were going to lose their lands and privileges, and that Brazil would become a communist dictatorship. That was the big fear of the bourgeoisie at this time. And then from that time to now, Lula has gone from a hero to a pariah to many people in our society, right? So many people don't like him. The society of Brazil is very divided around Lula today. There are those who defend him until the very end. There is a little bit of a cult of personality that we think it's not necessarily so healthy to discuss things more objectively. And then there are the ones who hate him and think he is the worst thing that happened to our country. I think it's not neither one nor the other. It's somewhere in between. And I don't have enough information to make a real judgment, you know, but I mean, who could have guessed at that moment that Lula would be in jail today? He's in jail today, that's the truth. And his presence in jail changes everything in this election. It's determinant. And today we have just a recent news you want to share?
Yeah, 2 days ago they decided finally that he couldn't be the candidate for the Workers' Party. Then Fernando Haddad is like starting now, 1 month before the election, the campaign, so it's quite hard to have a very new candidate like this. I hope he can manage it, but it's hard.
Okay, he's a good guy.
Yeah, he's an amazing person.
Porque the candidate that's it's sort of appearing as one of the favorites is a very right-wing candidate. You know, it's a little bit like the Trump effect that's going on in Brazil right now.
He's almost
he's a joke. Yeah, he's like a fascist, homophobic, a military guy, and who supports the dictatorship. You know, the military dictatorship. He makes propaganda about it. I mean, he's just a lunatic, and the only person who could clearly win is Lula. Haddad, especially starting now so late, it's hard. I mean, it's going to be much harder, basically. So we're in a very, very delicate moments right now.
The fears of the bourgeoisie before Lula's election in 2002 they didn't arrive, because Lula's government and Dilma's, who were just after him, but quite the same thing, was very good for rich people, for banks. So Brazil didn't become communist dictatorship. It was good for everybody, for rich and poor people. So I don't think this family would be really different than they were 15 years ago. I think their fears were not the good one, because what really changed in Brazil were the mentalities, were the possibility of poor people become something else, go to the universities, dream about another future. So the problem in this family in this moment would be our children, they might don't go to university because they are lazy, they don't study, but the daughter of the maid, she can have another future thanks to Lula's government and Workers' Party government. So this family, I think they might be in this fascist or right-wing side in this moment.
But with some exception. I mean, everything she's mentioning about the future of the maids having the possibility of a new future has to do with the affirmative action, with the quota system that became federal law finally in 2012, but started to be experimented by Lula around 2006. It's the first experience of a public university having quotas for minority students, for students who are either black, brown, mestizo, or who come from the public school system, elementary school system, which at the end is pretty much the same, you know. Class and race are very, very tied together in Brazil. So, I mean, this is what she's talking about. And I think that there's some people in the family would vote for Lula's candidate, but it's the minority, because we have some characters in the, like there's this son, Miguel, who's a little bit the black sheep of the family. He clearly would not vote for the right-wing candidates. There's a story of awakening, maybe like homosexual awakening in this film, you know. This kid probably would be already in an age to vote today, and he probably would vote for whoever could beat the right-wing candidates. I think that this family would be equally divided as the country is divided today. Like a part of the family would go all the way with these right-wing candidates, and the other part would go with whoever has a chance to beat him, you know. I don't think that the military is interested in going back to power. And I don't feel that fear myself, you know. I think that if Lula was a candidate from prison, I probably would vote for him, and he probably would win, and then we would run a very serious risk of a coup. Like, this was my big fear, I think. Now that he finally said that he's not going to go, and I kind of knew that he was going to do that, I think that the democratic process is going to go smoothly, I hope. This is the main thing that she talked a few times in interviews, that all we hope is that the next candidate who wins takes the seats, you know. This is very, very critical. Do we feel an urge? Yeah, I mean, I think that we feel an urge to make engaged work, you know. But I think it's. But I usually start from the very personal, you know, and then I open up to the broads. But I start through the very personal, the things that really touch me, move me, the things I lived, or things that some friends of mine lived, like Lucas, in this case. But yeah, I think there's a series of films like those you mentioned, and then Kleber Mendonça's films as well, that even though they're always very political as well, you know, even though they are very personal. And if you live in a country with so many social disparities or so many issues, it's almost like a responsibility to talk about those issues. If we have public money to make movies, you know, it's like a cycle. It's not like I'm trying to give profit to a producer, you know. I'm the only organization to whom we own something is the state, because it's the state that's sponsoring us, and so it's almost like it feels natural to reflect on the state of things, you know.
I am a son of the exile, from my mother's exile, from the dictatorship, so I always had this really big fear from dictatorship, and she was in jail, she had to run away from Brazil, She had a lot of friends that was shot, that was tortured. So I'm always afraid about that. When Lula was elected in 2002, I felt like, okay, this big fear is okay, it won't arrive anymore. I thought just now, in this very, very complicated Brazilian situation, politic situation, that no, the military wasn't very interested. I didn't feel that. But there is something that I think it's very, very dangerous, which is arriving now in Brazil. It's the public schools that the government is not able to control, or because of the violence or because of the money. Some governments are giving to the militaries to direct these schools. So this is very, very dangerous. So it can be not a dictatorship, but if the army is taking care of the education, I don't know which kind of people they are making. So
they're educating. Yeah.
They're educating. So I'm not sure about this type of thing. And I thought that the dictatorship in Latin America was really done. But we are having very strange examples. Correa in Ecuador, which is from the left, but he was very, very hard with his oppositors. Now in Venezuela, we have a very strange situation also. So I'm not so convinced that we are out of this danger. And I really, I'm very afraid about it.
You understand the thing about the schools that she said? Some schools in some states of Brazil, public schools, that are not being well managed anymore because of lack of resource, because of violence in those communities, they are being taken over by the army. So the government's like allowing the army to run those schools, and they are charging a small fee for people to go to those schools, which has never happened before because they're public in Brazil, they don't pay anything. And it's a way for those schools, like they say, not to die, you know, so they're taking over, and then these concerns comes, like, so how are we educating those kids, you know? Who are they going to become?